So what does everybody's clock say right now?
102.
Will everyone please turn their sound off so we can get started because it echoes. Welcome, welcome. I'm delighted that you're all here. It seems that my programs come on rainy days, and it was snowing last time. But the weather doesn't bother us when we're online. Thank you to Kelly, Clarida, Sharon Masso, and Doc Lang for helping with the program coordination, and thank you teachers for your flexibility, your endurance, and your creativity during this really difficult time. I'm going to introduce our speakers in just 1 second, and I'm going to share in the presentation just for a little bit, not a lot. So just let me say my thing about my center, and then we'll get started. But, and of course, when I want to move my screen, it's not going to happen. There we go. Okay, so it's spring soon. And if we were in person, I would, please turn off your sound. Please turn off your sound. Thank you. I brought out a little poem that I used to use in first and second grade and kindergarten. And notice it's about spring, and the air is warm and the sky is blue. The leaves are green yellow because they're new. Your feet go skipping, the birds all sing. The whole world is happy because it is spring. Would this be considered an activity that used the science of reading or the simple view? I'm thinking about it. I didn't think about it when I was actually doing it as a teacher. And then, of course, it was St. Patrick's Day, and we could sing about the old man named Michael Finnegan, and he had whiskers on his chin again. Along came the wind and blew them in again. Poor old Michael Finnegan, begin again. I'm sorry, it's the wrong blue. But once again, would this be considered good practice in the science of reading? I'd like to mention, as I always do, the wonderful vendors who contribute door prizes, and congratulations to those who received them. The Collaborative Classroom, Book Source, Heinemann, Rosen Classroom, Sundance, Newbridge, Blue Star Education, excuse me, Alive Studios, Footsteps to Brilliance, Benchmark, iStation, Letterland, and Alliance for Young Children. And enjoy your gifts, those who were randomly selected. As you know, we have coaching. It seems to me that it is budget time in school, and much to my surprise and delight, it seems like there might be COVID money, because we are getting so many requests for really exciting coaching experiences. I like to mention the Rutgers Reading Club, and this was a study that does show, and all the schools we've done this in, the children do improve a lot. I also want to mention that we are tutoring now, right in school districts, and it's a lot of fun. Also, I want to mention the Reading Specialist certification at Rutgers, which is both Reading Specialist and a supervisor program. And I just was talking with some people in Plainfield. They are hiring folks, 18 new reading specialists for first and second grade only for next year. If you have the credentials, please apply. Our next event will be with Kate Roberts on Thursday, April 29th. I hope to see you then, all about reading for writing and writing for reading. So I have a few things to say myself. I'm
Yes,
going to
thank you, love.
introduce, please turn off the sound, folks. I want to introduce our speakers to you, and then I'm going to be sort of formally beginning our discussion. Tim, you want to put up your picture so we can see you, and you can make it bigger too, then you can wave to everybody. Is a professor of literacy at Kent State University, director of his award-winning reading clinic. He holds several endowed chairs in educational leadership. He's written probably more than 200 articles and 50 books on curriculum and reading education. He's the author of The Fluent Reader, reading the mega book of Fluency, and he's published in Reading Research Quarterly, Reading Teacher, Reading Psychology, and many more. He served on the board of directors of the International Literacy Association. He co-edited Reading Teacher, Journal of Literacy Research. He's past president of the College Reading Association. He's an elected member into the International Reading Hall of Fame, and he recently received the William A. Gray Citation of Merit from the International Literacy Association. I cut your bio in half, Tim, because I wanted to give you more time. David, I had to do the same thing. Where is David? Do you want to come on to the screen? P.David Pearson is the Evelyn Corey Emeritus Chair at California, Berkeley, where he served as a professor and a dean, co-director of the Center for Improvement of Early Research Achievement at Michigan, and for the Center of the Study of Reading at the University of Illinois. He was elected member of the International Reading Association Board of Directors and inaugural chair of the Literacy Research Panel, and served as president of the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. His awards are from every possible award you can get for theory, research, and practice from LRA, LIA, NCTE, IRA, ARA, and he received the Outstanding Alumni Award from the University of Minnesota, and of course is a member of the Reading Hall of Fame. Recently, the Literacy Research Association created the P.David Pearson Scholarly Influence Award to honor scholarship that impacts literacy practice. So our speakers are renowned researchers, theorists, and practitioners. So I have a slide up there that says politically incorrect, politically correct. And depending upon when we are in time, watch that slide. We could just stand on a dime and it moves one side to the other. And I'm not sure where we are now, but we're somewhere. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And hi, everybody. Have a few things that I want to contribute to the concept of the science of reading. There have been debates about reading instruction as far back as I can remember, and I have been a part of the reading community a very long time. Sometimes we're promoting decoding skills and say in early childhood, you learn to read, and that meant decode. And in elementary school, you read to learn, and that meant comprehension. But isn't reading all about meaning? I mean, how can you possibly in pre-K, K1, 2, not deal with meaning? Phil Goff described the simple view of reading in 1972. His theory was about literacy development, and he stated that the brain needed to process decoding skills and linguistic/language skills or vocabulary to comprehend. So to be a fluent reader, you needed to be able to decode, and you needed to be able to have the vocabulary necessary to comprehend. He said that they were equally important. And from his simple view of reading, a lot comes from the science of reading, it started to be called that. He never suggested how to teach reading. He just described the processes that go on in the brain. But others started to interpret it. And it started to be called the science of reading. Sometimes we made instructional materials and they seemed to favor decoding early on and in a fairly direct and explicit manner. And we began to contrive materials such as decodable text, in basal readings, and they were often void of meaning. So then we moved to whole language. We flip-flop, back and forth over the eras. And I once remember, David, you said something about how come we never, get in the middle or something like that. And you said, because it's not sexy. And I think he's right, that it's more fun to talk about it when it's way on the left or way on the right. So in decoding, there was not much of an emphasis, the whole language, on decoding. And we always raised the question, how much should we spend on decoding and how much on comprehension? Are they equally important or not? There are a lot of empirical studies about Ingoff's model, and that show that children need to decode and understand the language, certainly. And so it got called the science of reading in terms of there is research. There also is research on many other factors that influence learning to read. And some things are not that measurable. My colleague Muriel Rand, and if you're here, Muriel, there you are, wave your hand real close so everybody can see you, from New Jersey City University. We recently had an article published, which we did send to you, called The Importance of Play in Literacy Development. And we featured studies that demonstrated language development, background knowledge are built when children play, but they certainly don't look like they're learning to read when they're playing. And so sometimes the people who think about the science of reading, or call it that, might assume that that's not something that they really need to do. But we know they build background knowledge, we know they build language, which are all necessary for reading instruction. I think reading is taught with the head, your heart, and the science. In the 2000s, the National Reading Panel and the Literacy Reading Panel report and the national standards were all published. We need more current. It's in 2000. We need to continue the research. And this is what I believe we need to add to whatever the science of reading is. We all know that the teacher and not the material is going to make the difference. And we still buy programs and we think they're going to make the difference. But in reality, you're going to make the difference with whatever you use. So we need more professional development to improve our reading instruction. I believe that the first year of teaching needs to be with a master teacher, and that will make a better reading teacher. We need family literacy programs that will improve reading instruction. All children need more time to be taught to read. It's the major goal of early childhood. When a child is behind 1 year in school, they need 120 more hours of reading instruction to get on level. Interdisciplinary teaching of reading instruction provides more time for learning to read, which is so necessary. Every minute of the school day, whether in gym, art, music, social studies, science, and math, should be the teaching of reading in the primary grades. We need to view it as the most important thing we can do. We need more teachers in the classroom. How do we do our differentiating grouping? It's just too hard with one person to get to enough groups. and differentiate our instruction so children get to be in more groups more often with productive, independent activities. And we need co-teaching. Teachers learn from each other. Teaching is such an all by yourself in that room. We need more adults in the room. The only place where we only have one person doing an important job is in the who teach in groups, basically, they are teachers and in the Army. You go to a department store, you get handled one-on-one. Everything you do, think about it, is one-on-one, but we teach children in large groups, and we need to do something about that. School needs to be open 12 months a year. And in the evenings, it needs to be a place for adult education and to mingle and engage in social activities. And my last comment, please don't forget the children who are in grade level. They need instruction to reach their potential like everybody else. And often they're forgotten, they're ignored. And so I feel very strongly about, with whatever else I said, that teaching all of our children is so important, and don't waste their talent so that they can get as far as they can go. So that doesn't sound like the science of reading, but that's my science of reading. And Tim, I think you are going to speak to us now.
I am. Thanks, Leslie, and thanks everybody for joining me. Well, quite an honor for me to be able to present with Leslie and with David, two of my heroes in the area of literacy instruction. And what I'd like to do is to share with you some things I've been thinking about over the last several years here. I hope you don't mind if I do a little personal plugging, though, before we begin. This is the news I shared with Leslie and David when we got on board about an hour ago. I'm a new grandpa. It's Adelaide Susan Granda, born in St. Louis 2 days ago, I think it was. And we're so happy we got our vaccines because we'll be able to drive out to visit her in about 5 or 6 days or so. So we're really looking forward to that. In fact, I'm going to put on my grandpa hat here. I just noticed when I have my hat off, the light above shines on my bald head, and I don't want to blind anybody, so I'm going to wear my grandpa hat for the session here. But I do want to mention my website, timrasinski.com. I might make this homework, okay? I put a lot of additional materials there that follow up actually on today's topic, especially my blog and my resource page there. So I have a lot of the articles I've written over the years are there. I'll just give you an example of what you might find on the blog. Is this actually comes from, since we're talking about the art of teaching reading, this comes from a visit my wife and I went to the National Art Museum in Washington, D.C. a couple years ago. And what you're looking at there is actually a work of art in the National Art Gallery. If you take a closer look at it, what you notice is every one of the words in that portrait mean the same thing. They mean money. And I thought to myself, that's pretty clever. Talking about the art of teaching reading. What if we wanted to expand kids' vocabularies, have him do the same thing? Get into a thesaurus, find a collection of words that have similar meanings and make their own version of this piece of artwork. Would that be a great way of building vocabulary scientifically, but also in an artistic way? I also want to mention that since the pandemic started back in March a year ago, I've been posting 3 lessons a week. Monday, morphology, where we talk about word roots. I do a word ladder Wednesday. Just did one yesterday on St. Patrick's Day, and every Friday we do Fluency Friday. So if you follow me at Tim Rasinski 1, you'll be able to get 3 lessons or resources, if you will, every week or so. Well, we know that teaching reading is a science. We've heard a lot about that. I think, it's always been a science, not only the reading, but the teaching of reading. But I think it really got some legs in the year 2000 when the National Reading Panel took a look at the research and came out with those big 5 elements: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension. And what they said was that if you want to grow readers, these are competencies that we need to develop in our students. And I think we're all pretty good with that. But the bigger question is how. But this kind of evolved for me into this model of reading that I often share in my own classes. I say, if you're going to be a teacher of reading, in the elementary grades especially, you have to spend some time every day looking at words, not only phonics, but spelling, vocabulary. You have to spend some time on fluency. And of course, we need to develop comprehension strategies and competencies with our students. But we also know, and I think most of you who are with me would also agree, that teaching reading is an art. And that's what I want to explore with you as well today, that it's not one, it's not the other, it's both. And really to be, and that's why teaching is so hard. That's the challenge. You have to be both a scientist and an artist to have the results that you want in your classrooms. I happen to be a collector of quotes, and so I'm going to start with several quotes that I've collected over the years. And here's two of my favorite. It is a supreme art. There's that word art of the teacher to awaken joy and creative expression and knowledge. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Who said that? Albert Einstein. Again, I need to ask everybody if you wouldn't mind muting your mic here. But one of the great scientists, one of the great minds, of the last 500,000 years, is telling us about the art of teaching there. And then we have the Dalai Lama. When educating the minds of our youth, we must not forget to educate their hearts. It's not just the minds that we educate, it has to be the hearts. And I think Louise Rosenblatt talked about that when she talked about aesthetic and efferent reading. It's the aesthetic part that's just as important, that touches our hearts there. And then let me take you back to Psych 101, talking about Bloom's taxonomy. He talked about these various levels of learning and understanding. At the lowest level, we have remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing. They go up the chart here, but what's at the top? Creating. The ability to take something, and when you can create it, you're exhibiting understanding of what it is that you're learning here. And I think that means going beyond what we know when we create. And to me, that's art. That's art. In fact, look what Drew Faust, past president of Harvard University, and Wynton Marsalis, that's an interesting combination, isn't it? Composer and jazz trumpeter extraordinaire, had to say about art. It's about imagining beyond the bounds of what we already know, creating there. And that's what art is about. In fact, let's take a look at what Piaget had to say. The goal of education in schools should be creating men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. Men and women who are creative, inventive, and discoverers, who can be critical and verify and not accept everything that they are offered. And golly, all we have to do is think about what has been happening over the past year about being critical and verifying the information that's presented our way. That's what we need more and more on. And to me, that's a lot of art. And then we have John Dewey, who had this to say: art has the means of keeping alive the sense of purposes that outrun evidence, and of meanings that transcend habit, going beyond what we already know, creating there. Yeah, what do we know about art? Well, Elliot Eisner, the great art educator who's now passed away, but had this to say 15 or so years ago: we live in a time that puts a premium on the measurement of outcomes, on the need to be absolutely clear about what we want to accomplish. We call our data hard, our method stiff. We call it rigor. And boy, isn't that the truth? I just made a list of phrases that I've collected over the years that refer to the science of reading, scientifically based reading instruction, fidelity of an implementation, quantitative benchmarks, adequate yearly progress, more recently, multi-tiered systems of support. I think we all have seen these before. And I'm not arguing against these, but there's got to be more than that. But stiff methods, hard data, if this is all we have here. And of course, disengaged students here. Leslie, you're talking about decodable text. Well, here's an example of one. And I think, we would agree that this is what those who ascribe to this scientific approach would advocate here, the decodable text. Take a look at this one here. I just found it off the internet. You can find them everywhere. This is a text for emphasizing the consonant vowel consonant words, like in the word families an, and ot. Dan is a man. He has a van. In his van is a fan, a can, and a pan. Dan is hot. He ran to his van to get it. I lost it already. I can't even read it all. The fan helps. Dan is not hot here. Wow. Is this science? Well, yeah, we're working on those word families, right? That, the phonograms, if you will, or rhymes that Marilyn Adams talks about. But is it art? Not so much for me here. And what's the consequence of all this? Well, Diane Ravitch claims this: drilling children on how to take tests discourages innovation. Creativity, there's that notion of creativity, again, punishes divergent thinking, prioritizes skills over knowledge. And it's, of course, certainly dead in kids' interest in school. And I think, we see that all the time. And so what's the result? For the first time, research shows that American creativity is actually in the decline. We used to be some of the most creative people in the world. And now it seems to be we're losing that edge here. And especially among our youngest children are becoming less creative here. And what's the result of all this? Are we improving our reading achievement? Not so much. You look at the recent PISA study, found that we were number 15 in the world, well behind Russia, number 15. Look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress over 25 years, 92 to 2017. Pretty flat, isn't it? I see a gain of about actually, this is an older one. Actually, if you look up to 2019, same thing though. It's pretty flat. Same thing for grade 8 as well. So, despite in 2000 talking about these scientific basis for teaching of reading, we don't see much in terms of overall improvement nationwide here. So, what can art offer education? Well, I love this quote. I'm going to go way back in time now. Plato. He said, I would teach children music, physics, philosophy, but most importantly, music. For the patterns in music and all the arts are the keys to learning. Boy, I think he was really onto something. In fact, let's talk about art for a second. Art students. This is considered a classic study in the area of art education. In this study, what they did was they had a group of college art students, and they were divided into two groups. One group was given the criteria in which their work was to be judged, and the other group was more open-ended, kind of just do your best. And then they brought in some art experts to take a look at what these students had created. And what they found was students in the evaluation group produced artwork that was significantly lower on creativity and the overall quality than did students in the non-evaluation control group. Giving students, teachers, and children that chance to be creative, I think, really opens up opportunities to learn, develop as readers. And of course, let me end with my quotes with Steve Jobs, the Apple guy here. Walter Isaacson did a biography of him several years ago, right before he passed away. And I was really caught by this quote by Jobs. He said, I always thought myself as a humanities person, but I liked electronics. And then I read something that one of my heroes, Polaroid, said about the importance of the people who could stand at the intersection of the humanities and sciences. And I decided that is where I wanted to be. And of course, I think that's where we want to be as well, the intersection of the arts and the scientists. And of course, you look at the Apple computer, and people would say there's elements of art just in the design of those machines here. So when I think of art, I don't know, how much somebody could argue with me on these, but these are words that come to my mind. Art is aesthetic. It touches the heart. The word aesthetic is a Greek word, and it means feelings. And when you go to a dentist and you get an anesthetic, what happens? You lose feelings in your jaw. But it's that kind of reading and reading instruction that educates the hearts, as the Dalai Lama said, joyful, playful. Leslie, you're talking about the notion of play, but things that touch the heart here, as Louise Rosenblatt would say. Art is also creative, purposes that go beyond what we already know, challenging ourselves as teachers, challenging our children as students to move beyond what they already know, and authentic, real life, reflective of real life. And one of my quotes that I didn't put in here was by Dewey, who said that schools should be embryonic communities that are reflective of what happens outside the school wall. And of course, all we have to do is take a look at that decodable text that I shared with you earlier. And you can see that I wouldn't call that very reflective of the real text that we ask ourselves and our children to read. So can teaching of reading be both an art and a science? Can it be both, not one, not the other? And of course, to me, the answer is yes. And I think that the answer is yes for all of us, but how? And I'm just going, in the interest of time, just talk to you about my own area. Reading fluency is one that I've spent over 40 years exploring. And reading fluency is really actually made up of two subcompetencies: automatic word recognition the ability to recognize words so effortlessly that you pay minimal attention to the words or word decoding, and you can pay attention to meaning. And then prosodic or expressive reading. If I think about somebody who's a fluent speaker or reader, it's not somebody who reads fast, but somebody who reads or speaks with expression, getting loud and soft and fast and slow. Now, one of the scientific findings of fluency has been this notion of repeated readings. Some people call it deep reading, some people now call it close reading, but that idea of reading something repeatedly. And the man who first brought that to our attention was David, one of your mentors, I believe, Dr. J. Samuels, the method of repeated readings. An article that appeared in the Reading Teacher back in 1979 is now considered a classic here. But what Jay found was that when you would work with especially struggling readers and ask them to read a text, let's call it text A, and we'll ask them to read it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. With every reading, they improved. They got better. They improved in terms of their speed or their accuracy, their comprehension. But you'd expect that. You read something multiple times, you get better at it. It's what happens next. Students then moved on to passage B. B is a more challenging text than passage A. So ostensibly, we should expect kids' performance to go downhill. It's a harder text. But actually what you see happening is that red arrow, they improve. There's an improvement. And, the only thing they did between the first reading of A and the first reading of B was they practiced A. So really the only thing you could attribute that growth in B is the practice in A. What were they learning? Well, they were learning, perhaps picking up some words in A that showed up in B, maybe developing that sense of prosody and probably confidence. When you practice something to get it to the point where you can read it well, that sense of confidence carries over. Well, long story short, we move on to passage C. C is more challenging than B, and even though C is more difficult, again, what we see, improvements. Folks, this has been seen in study after study. It is a piece of science. So something that we can really hang our hats on, repeated readings, especially with our younger and struggling readers. And here's another piece of science. We know that speed of reading or rate of reading, words correct per minute, it's actually a good way of assessing that automaticity portion of fluency. Those of you who work with Dibbles or Ames Web, you know what I'm talking about. Highly correlated to comprehension there. So what's the result of all this, taking those 2 bits of science? Well, what we have now is many classrooms where well-meaning teachers, well-meaning principals are having students read largely informational text for the singular purpose of reading it fast. Let's read this 5 times until you can read it at 110 words correct per minute, and then we'll move on to the next one. Where in real life does that happen there? And in fact, here's an interesting example. I picked this one up from, the International Literacy Association, back when it was known as the International Reading Association. They had a newsletter that they would send out occasionally. This one was about 9 years ago. When you're my age, 9 years is a blink of the eye here. But look what they offered to teachers here. Fluency leaps forward with timed readings, and you can notice that alarm clock there. What were they basically suggesting to teachers out there? Get out the stopwatch and have your kids read something repeatedly until they read it at a certain speed. Then move on to the next. There, to me, I went too far here. To me, I call that fake fluency. Is this authentic? Where in real life do you really find somebody trying to read something as fast as they can? The only thing I can think of is those drug commercials on the radio where at the end of pitching the drug, they tell you how it's going to kill you if you actually take it or so. Fake fluency. Find a real reason. Now, keep in mind also that this other part of fluency, reading with prosody or expression. If you're trying to read as fast as you can, how is it possible to read with expression? Of course, those things go against each other, don't they? So let's take another look at this notion of fluency, both scientifically and artfully. Why would anybody want to engage in repeated readings, or perhaps a better term might be rehearsal? And of course, the answer is performance. Have you ever been in a play? Have you ever sung a song for the audience, performed a poem? I bet you rehearsed, and if you didn't, I bet you wish you had. Guess what I was doing earlier this morning? Guess what I was doing last night? I was practicing this presentation. I hope to do as good a job as possible. And that Leslie might invite me back someday there. But then that begs the next question. Are there texts that are meant to be performed? Well, yeah. First of all, informational text would be at the top of my list, although you could do it. But how about poetry, songs, readers' theater scripts, dialogues, monologues, speeches from American history? These are texts that are actually meant to be read out loud, to be read with prosody. And yet, if you take a look at this list here, these are often things that get pushed off to the side with our emphasis on informational text and narrative here. This is my reading clinic at Kent State, and every one of those charts is a poem or a song. And the goal is for students to learn these. Every day we put one up there, and we practice, we repeatedly rehearse. We end up performing it for parents who show up at the end of the day. But every day our children get to learn something and learn to read it successfully and feel competent in that. Every 4th of July, we gather around the flagpole of the school we're working at, and the kids perform patriotic poetry and songs for an audience of community members and moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas. Here's our kids, they're actually performing patriotic songs there. And what I'd love to show you is this close-up of these two kids. They had been rehearsing these songs for the last 2 or 3 days, God Bless America and all the great patriotic songs. And they know the songs by heart. But one of the things we constantly tell the kids is look at the words. It's not reading unless you track the words visually. And that's exactly what they're doing. You can find poetry all over the place. And I've had the pleasure and honor of working with poets and songs over the course of my career. But, we talk about creativity. What's great is when kids begin to write their own stuff. This is a first grade, 2 first graders who ended up writing their own readers' theater script. Hi, I'm Beth. Hi, I'm Katie. Do you love me? No. Okay, then I'm glad you understand. I'm glad you too. Folks, I used to get in trouble for doing this in school. We should be encouraging children to do this. And older kids, or how about taking the frog and toad stories and turn them into scripts that kids can practice and perform? Are these kids being aesthetic? Are they being authentic? Are they being creative all at the same time? And my answer to that is yes. Or even taking a segment of a story from the Incredible Shrinking Machine by Seymour Simon. Again, students turning that into a script, being creative, being authentic, being aesthetic at the same time. That to me is fluency that is both artful as well as scientific. And that's what we want with our kids. And that's a challenge. It's not easy to do, no question about it, but it's where we need to try to take ourselves here. And the science begs this question: does it really work, Rasinski? Does having kids practice and perform poetry, scripting songs in the classroom, does it work? Oh yeah, I could share with you several, but I'll just share this one with you. Lauren Griffith, 4th grade teacher from West Buncombe County Elementary in North Carolina, attended one of my workshops years ago. And she started to do this. And what she has found, it's actually in an article in the Reading Teacher, you can actually find on my website, but her kids who struggle on average make over 3 years, close to 3 years growth in reading, and the 1 year they're in her class. And while normally we expect 4th graders to improve by 25 words correct per minute over the course of 4th grade, her kids gained 60 words per minute, yet not once did she ever tell her students, read as fast as you can. You don't have to. You just practice authentically, artfully. You're going to become a faster reader, more automatic, if you will. Other studies as well, and many of these are on my website, but I'm running out of time here. But I would like to, again, emphasize this model of reading, but the challenge is to do it in artful ways. Before I turn it back over to Leslie and David, I'd like to end with a poem. I love poetry, and I love this one by Karen Moreau Durica. She wrote about poetry, and I think it really captures what it is that we need to be as teachers. Somehow, a life without poetry seems dismal, empty, flat, not much. So each day in my classroom, I read sonnets, haikus, free verse, and such. An observer sat in my room one day, noted poems title, evaluated delivery, recorded lesson sequence, said dryly, it seems there's no connection curricular-wise, no anticipatory set, no vocabulary drill, no comprehension query. Do they even know what it means? Oh, I could have contrived a defense or two. Spirits flowed with peaceful joy. Honesty prevailed. Simple truth explained. I read it because it's beautiful, I said. Oh, she didn't quite frown, but recalled all the same. We've standards to meet, timelines to keep, pages to cover, important content to be read. I looked at her and to my students who had relished the words, danced with the rhythm, mused with the meaning, were richer in spirit than when we began. I read it because it was beautiful. And beauty is never superfluous, never irrelevant, always needed, always in my lesson plan. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time. By the way, I will mention that if you like, I've been writing about this for a while. I've got 2 articles from my colleagues that appeared in the Reading Research Quarterly and Literacy Today over the last year talking about this notion of art. So if you're interested, and if you're an ILA member, you can find those articles. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Leslie, and look forward to hearing from David.
David, take whatever time you need. Where are you?
I'm here, and
Yeah,
I'm just getting
take
set
all
up.
the time you need.
Okay, I will. I will probably won't do that because to do this talk right probably takes 3 hours. But
No,
so
no,
I'll
no,
stay
no,
to
don't
my
do
allotted
that.
time.
No,
Yeah.
don't do that.
Well, it's good to be here. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
great. My name is David Pearson. I'm from the University of California at Berkeley. And Leslie, I believe this is about over the years since since you were a professor, since you started your professorship at Rutgers. I think I've been to this conference, but in live form, maybe what, 6, 8 times or so. So it's good to be here again.
At least, and I'll keep inviting you.
Well, it's good to know I'm welcome somewhere in this world. As you can see, I have appropriated my science of reading to include science, art, and magic of teaching reading. But I know a lot more about the science and the art of the magic, so I'm leaving it to Tim and Leslie to compensate for my lack of wisdom on the latter two. I will have a few things to say, however, about what science can tell us about promoting art and magic in the classroom. The science of reading is certainly a hot topic today. It's in the popular press, even made the New York Times. It's on numerous broadcasts all over the country. Those sponsored by not-for-profit organizations. And I noticed that almost every publisher has a Science of Reading podcast series. It was an NPR feature. Ed Week had a conference about it for a couple of days. And as near as I can tell, every new commercial program is based upon the science of reading. Well, the latest what is it? Why is this even an issue? It's the latest rhetorical ploy to ensure that phonics gets taught first and fast for all kids, is the way I look at how it's used in the public medium. It has many predecessors. We had scientifically based reading research in the early 2000s and Reading First and the National Reading Panel report. And that was what constituted the evidentiary background for different approaches to teaching reading, which Tim reviewed. It was also a part of preventing reading difficulties in 1998. And that was an attempt to talk to us about how we get kids off to a good start so that they won't run into trouble in the early grades. It was about the attack on whole language that we saw very visible in the mid-1990s. Much of it by research coming out from the NICHD showing that how important phonics was and phonemic awareness, particularly for kids at risk for dyslexia. It was a part of Marilyn Adams' beginning to read, thinking and learning about print in 1990 or 91. It was a part of becoming a nation of readers in 1984. And indeed, it all started with Jean Charles' book in 1967, Learning to Read, The Great Debate. Now, each of these efforts was a publicly sponsored in all but the case of Charles' book, government-sponsored effort to try to settle once and for all, how we should teach beginning reading. And what was interesting about all these books is that almost all of them did indeed conclude that an early systematic emphasis on the code is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for learning to read. Systematic phonics does its work best when it's part of a complete curriculum that also attends to fluency, meaning, knowledge, language, both written and oral language, and equally as important, using literacy to do things in the world, once you've done once you've learned the skills and the like. And it's interesting that almost all of these approaches drew this conclusion once they had finished their work. Why then does it persist? My conclusion, number one, is that I want to offer 2, but not 3 cheers for phonics, because it does part of the job, but it certainly doesn't do all the job. And the second conclusion I draw from this, and this is from seeing this, I started graduate school in 1966, so all these things have happened during my career. My conclusion number 2 is that the quest by some will continue until there's a federal phonics for all law. And you know what? There's one that's being proposed in the House of Representatives right now by a bipartisan law from a representative from Pennsylvania and one from Arkansas. And it's under the guise of, screening for dyslexia. But the real intent is to make sure that there's early phonics for all students. Some thoughts, if you will, about the role of science in American society. Science is the driver of our economy. We're always talking about how science, and by the way, this is one of the important things that universities do for our economy, is they train scientists who do the research and development that creates the innovations that drive our economy, particularly in the tech world and in the bioscience. It's the driver of our international luster. We feel good about the fact that we're ahead of so many nations in terms of our scientific advantage. But science versus common sense, we get this response, well, yeah, I understand that, but it just stands to reason that, how could a little saliva hurt me after all? Science versus belief, it just couldn't be. When we see no large gatherings, except, of course, for religious services as of last November. And then you could run into science versus the First Amendment. I have my right to say and believe what I want to say and believe, and the like. And so what we have, I think, is a love-hate relationship with science as a culture. And we like it, but when it gets in the way, we tend not to abide by it much. In terms of the current public and professional conversations, I have found several different uses of the science of reading. First of all, and this, by the way, is the person who works for, I can't remember, the American Public Summary Reports. Her name is Emily Hanford. She bases her recommendation for early phonics not on research about phonics versus not phonics, but on the basic research that many folks who do fMRI studies to determine the parts of the brain that are activated when kids do different kinds of reading activities. She bases her notion on that. And what it seems to say is that, look, if you look at what adult readers do when they read, there's brain activity evidence that they convert the orthographic display that they see into a phonological code on the way to making meaning. And the logic seems to be that if this is what people really do, then that's the way that we should teach kids to read. And this has been appropriated by the Phonics First advocates, I think, around the country, this sort of phonics for all kind of agenda. A second meaning of science of reading is more like what Tim talked about when he talked about the use of the scientifically based reading research in the National Reading Panel report. That was also the backbone of Reading First within No Child Left Behind. And the idea here is, just as there is basic research to show the processes of adult readers and the like, there must also be pedagogical research that pits one approach against another in order to find out which one works better. And I think the analogy is often made between physics, which is pure science, versus engineering or architecture, which is an applied science. And by analogy, then there's basic research on the processes that people engage in, and then there's technological applications to practices, which is what most pedagogical research is that influences us. And then another meaning that's in the RRQ issue is a lot of the articles in the Reading Research Quarterly issue were sort of like, hey, wait a minute, you guys emphasized in the science of reading all the stuff about, cracking the code and the kinds of mental processes that go on in the fundamental process of reading. But you forgot about a whole bunch of other things. What about knowledge? What about language? And then another group of articles said, wait a minute, if science is good for understanding basic processes, and if it's also good for understanding pedagogy, then don't we want to apply that scientific disposition to how we translate this basic research into practice, to how we do implementation? Tony Bright at the Carnegie Foundation for Teaching has this new improvement science, and it's all about how you make things better inside classrooms and the like. And then a lot of the articles in the RRQ were sort of like second thoughts about science, particularly looking for the consequences, especially unintended consequences of a scientific disposition and how those might negatively impact certain populations. And then there's another set of articles that talks about, well, it's like a lot of other things like assessment. Research has got to be accountable for its consequences as well as its assumptions and its methods. And if you don't display that and make them public, then you might be trying to hide something. Like assessment, there's an ethical dimension to research, even research that's been blessed as science, that must be acknowledged by those who engage in it and use it. And the consequences of using science are not always as positive as we might think they are. So those are the different ways of looking at the science of reading that I think are part of the current conversation. What's included in a complete instantiation of what it would take to make a really scientific research? I'm what people call a compatibilist or a complementarian. And my fundamental ethic about doing research is that every way of looking at a phenomenon as important as reading, and particularly the acquisition of reading skill, is really important. And we should use any and all tools we can to help us understand this phenomena and actually improve its implementation. So I'm all for experiments. I like randomized field trials, especially for guiding policy. But you can't just get by with randomized field trials. And even in science, even in vaccine development, in drug development, in testing the efficacy of a new procedure in medicine, randomized field trials are the last 5 to 10% of the journey. Most of the science that goes into those things is involving careful descriptions of the phenomena in their natural settings. Think of all the work that went into the new RA, grounded vaccines that were just people doing things inside classrooms to see what went with that, and when you made this little change in the phenomenon, what happened over here and the like. Examinations of natural correlations amongst variables in a setting, going into classrooms and seeing what the relationship is between automaticity and decoding, fluency and comprehension. Natural experiments where serendipity does by circumstance what experiments do by intention. That is, finding a place that does things one way and a place that does things another way, trying to equate them in terms of how similar they are in terms of the population and the contextual surround of the school, and then drawing inferences about differences. Data gathered in the name of theory building, all the stuff that the current science of reading folks are doing on studies of brain activity. I think that stuff is great. I'm just not sure I want to base policy and practice on what happens inside the heads of adult readers as they read. Then there's all these kinds of design experiments where people, teacher and researcher collaborations, where people go out and do these planful incremental approaches to examining features of interventions, looking at what happens up close and personal in the classroom. And finally, qualitative research, ethnography, critical discourse analysis. What's that good for? Lots of things. Investigating plausibilities up front, looking at the consequences, both intended and unintended on the back end. We don't discover the dark side of certain interventions until we look at what happens to them when they actually get implemented in classrooms. Unpacking an intervention, especially to look for explanatory variables and what I like to call the active ingredients. If we had an intervention that did 5 things, we can go in and observe and try to draw inferences about which of those 5 things made the most difference in terms of what we actually saw in the moment, and generated situated understandings and generalizations about what happens in particular kinds of classrooms. That's a complete instantiation of the vision of, I think, what a true science of reading ought to include. Here's my conclusions about science of reading and the evidence-based curriculum. I think there are curricular and pedagogical processes that show up again and again as promoting gains in reading performance and the motivational side of learning as well. And we can and should privilege those practices. And when it comes to research, we would be fools to give up even a single tool in studying a phenomenon as complex as the nature and acquisition of literacy. We should be looking for synergies at all points along the way. And you know the most important new synergies to look at, because we've not only learned a lot about the cognitive side of literacy, what happens inside the head, we've learned a lot more about the social, cultural, and contextual forces at work when kids learn to read, and how a failure to take those into account might send you down the wrong pathway in terms of instruction. Here's some of my high-level recommendations for curriculum and pedagogy. I'm all for an early systematic, I believe that early systematic planning pays dividends in terms of context-free word recognition, reading nonsense words on lists and things like that, among other word reading tools. There's a great piece in that special issue of RRQ by Linnea Airy on word reading practices. And when you look at it, you think we should do everything we can to promote automaticity so that those things are under, that they don't take up much attention and energy when you're reading. Just as important, and here there's a great article by Donna Scanlon and Kim Anderson in the same issue of RRQ, and it's helping kids acquire a comparable set of word solving tools. And word solving tools are different from word reading tools because it's not automaticity that matters. What matters is intentionality and flexibility. And when you get in a cul-de-sac and you can't easily work your way out of it, you got to have some tools to help you figure out what the word says and means, or what the sentence says and means too. A third finding, and this is clear from, I was involved in the Reading for Understanding initiative and trying to synthesize all that. And one of the things we learned from that work is that as important as the code is in early reading acquisition, don't sacrifice an early emphasis on language, knowledge, and meaning in your quest to ensure a good start in the code. Because if you do, you'll pay the price for it a couple of years down the road after kids get over that decoding hump, and you realize that you've missed out on opportunities to fill up the bucket on knowledge and meaning. There's also a science of reading comprehension, and I'm proud to say that Nell Duke and I have done our third they've all been a decade apart, I think 2001, 2011, and now 2021, a piece on what we know about reading comprehension. And we actually intentionally just entitled it The Science of Reading Comprehension, and it's coming out in a couple of weeks from the reading teacher. I can share with you what we got this wonderful diagram that it's our latest way of conceptualizing this, and it's a layered model of effective comprehension instruction. As you can see, it starts up at the top with saying that you got to be in a classroom where things are going well and cooking and all the sort of rigmarole, as well as behavior issues and the like, are under control. You got to do lots of things to motivate literacy, language development, not only the words in the stories, but academic language, disciplinary language, how you talk social studies or science or literature, and then all the other aspects of language. Knowledge building, content area instruction, cultural knowledge building and activating, that's got to be there. Engagement with text, lots of time for reading text on your own, lots of time for talking with your buddies about what you're reading and what it means. Teaching about the nature of text, what genres, text structures, and features matter. And then finally, at the bottom of it, but at the base of it, but always important, as we know, your strategies and other processes and practices, probably using something like a gradual release of responsibility to keep things going. Well, those are the science. That's our new science of reading comprehension. That's my take on the science of science. Now the art of teaching reading. Let me give you an analogy. What is evidence-based practice in medicine? Well, we expect our doctors to read our symptoms, And other things being equal and lacking any context or patient-specific information, doctors are ethically obligated to choose the approach that most clearly supported by the weight of evidence. That's an ethical responsibility. But they're also obligated to adapt what they recommend if context or patient-specific information is available. That is, if they know something special about us, they need to take that into account in making a diagnosis and suggesting a treatment. We all want a doctor who knows our mitigating circumstances as well as he or she knows the science, the scientific evidence. You choose the best approach when all the information is taken into account. It's kind of an individualized medical care that balances evidence with context. By analogy, I'd like to argue that what is evidence-based practice in reading instruction? Read the symptoms, what characteristics do the kids present in the classrooms, and other things being equal, and lacking any context or student-specific information, choose the approach that most
in 1998, catastrophic was going to happen in the country.
But I can hear someone, but
Yeah.
adaptive context or patient-specific information is available. We all want teachers who know the kids as well as they know the evidence. Choose the best approach when all the information is taken into account. This is what we mean by individualized reading instruction. And we have tools that we use to make it happen. Formative assessment, the gradual release of responsibility, individualized instruction are all tools that help us implement that model of professional pedagogy. And that leads to professional judgment that's guided by deep knowledge of evidence-based practice and context, and in this case, student-specific information. So what this is it's a mandate for deep professional knowledge as a quid pro quo for broad professional prerogative. And that, I think, is exactly the deal that our profession makes with the public. We'll know as much as we can go if you let us make choices in the classroom. Both medicine and teaching have a responsibility to science and to art. And then finally, the magic. And the way I'm going to conceptualize magic is on the stuff associated with social and emotional learning and the key role of affect, emotion, motivation, engagement, self-efficacy, and identity in shaping how kids learn. Kids read better, write better, and learn more when they are engaged. And they're more engaged when teachers apply these principles. And these come right out of the work of John Guthrie and Alan Wakefield and some others. Really important to engagement are choice and autonomy, interest, self-efficacy, celebrating kids' attributions of efforts and showing how those map onto greater competence, collaboration, working with others. And finally, a real big impact on engagement is being in a curriculum that makes sense, and it's easy to sort of see the relationships between the parts and the like. And that's all really important. And it seems to me that when you think about this and you think about the events of the past year, more than anything else, we have so many gaps in our society to close. Gaps in curriculum between those who have and those who don't have the good curriculum, gaps in the assessments and the assessment practices available, healthcare and nutrition, income and employment, funds of knowledge, and the paying attention to the funds of knowledge that kids bring to the table. And these are really, really important issues. And I think what they suggest is that there are many things we need to do in our society to make it a more equitable society. But I think on the education side of things, housing too. The kind of accountability we talk about a lot in education is accountability to tests. And that's one kind of accountability, and we sure have a lot of it in our society. But there's another kind of accountability, and that's the kind of accountability we have to kids and their families. And I always think about this in terms of the resources that kids bring to the table. And my mantra here is that kids are who they are. They know what they know. They bring what they bring. Wishing that they knew something more, wishing that they knew something different won't make it so. And our job as teachers is to think about what kids know individually and collectively, to bring great respect for their cultures and high aspirations for their learning to the kids and their families. And to do this, I think, suggests that it's our responsibility as a nation, I think, to accept this goal and accept this responsibility. I think no responsibility could be more important, particularly in the times in which we currently live, than fulfilling this obligation to the kids and the families and the parents who we are charged with helping. I think to do so is an accomplishment that's worthy of our whole enterprise. It's an accomplishment worthy of a real science of reading, and it's an accomplishment worthy of all of our collective effort. Thank you for being the committed teachers you are. Thank you for caring about the kids who depend upon schools to learn from you how to read. And thank you for sharing this afternoon with myself and Leslie and Tim. And now I'm going to turn things right back over to Leslie.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much, Tim. We'd like to entertain some questions, or we can do what you suggested, David, go back and forth. If you think about what they all said, they said it eloquently and differently, but I think they said the same thing, which is reassuring and wonderful. You teach it with your head, your heart, and the science. I just can't, as David said, stick to just one way, because children are so different, and so many things affect what's going to happen to them and how they learn to read. Doc, did you pick up a question you can start some conversation with?
Not yet, but I'm keeping an eye on the chat if anyone wants to post one.
You can unmute and say it to us if you would like. Tim, at one point we were maybe on the board of directors of IRA together. I don't remember, and we used to give gifts to each other, and I have something that he gave to me, and I think everyone else. And it was in a little bit of a frame, and it said, 1,000 days of diligent study is less than, no, one with an excellent teacher, or maybe it's flipped. One day with an excellent teacher is better than 1,000 days of diligent study.
Yeah.
You make the difference. You make the difference.
We all do, yeah, for sure. Can I post a question up?
Absolutely.
Or maybe a comment, at least for David. I remember years ago, you were at a conference and you described yourself as, these reading wars have been going on for a while, and you positioned yourself in the radical middle, I think. Are you still in the radical middle?
Yeah, I'm still there. I watch the debates ebb and flow and the like. And my test of whether or not I'm where I should be is if the people who are most toward the language end of the continuum, and the people who are most toward skills first and fast end of the continuum, if I'm equally as often criticized by both groups, then I figure I must be in a pretty good place. So that's my litmus test for my position. But the reason I'm in the radical middle is not because I'm wishy-washy, not because I can't take up a position and the like. I'm there because that's how I read the research. I read the research and I see this works and I see that works and I see, and I hate to use the word balanced literacy anymore because it's become vilified by people, but it really is a kind of a balance. And I think so often we've used the wrong metaphor for balance, and the metaphor we've used is one like the fulcrum and equal amounts of stuff on either side. That's not the right metaphor. The better metaphor for balance is ecological balance. That is, you want the balance that's the balance of nature, where if one thing gets too dominant, it fouls up everything else. And so what you want to have are these things that are in balance, and everything's synergistic and working. So synergy is, I think, the right metaphor to drive balance, not equal amounts of things on different sides. But yes, I'm still there because that's how I read the evidence. And that's how I read best practice. When I go out in schools and I look at what teachers are doing, they're trying to do that same type of thing. They're trying to make sure that their kids have a full toolbox. Let's just sort of, negotiate the things they have to negotiate with. But I am not anti-phonics. I want to be brilliant.
Yeah, there is a statement in the chat that says, when considering students with dyslexia, do you think we need to stress the science over the art? I'd like to change the word dyslexia to struggling in general. And one of the things I think we need to worry about, we need to use the science, but those children need to be motivated more than any. And so we need to engage them, provide them with interesting, exciting things with choice, like David said, and some autonomy. And that's where we often abuse using too much of the science when, going into the pullout kids, special ed, use the science, but please use the art with them too. They deserve that.
Yes, something that comes to my mind. Well, first of all, David, in response to your comment there, the word that really sticks out to me is radical. And to me, that means passionate. You have a passion for teaching, and that to me is, speaks to the art. You're balanced in terms of the science, but you're an artist too, and passionate about teaching children well. Leslie, oftentimes we did, in response to that question you brought up, we talk about the notion of, dyslexia is often defined in terms of decoding, the inability or severe difficulty in decoding words. And I wanted to get back to something you started with, the notion of play. You and Muriel did the article, a really good piece. I read it on the notion of play, and it occurred to me. I've talked about this in the past. As adults, how often do we play games that are word games? Scrabble, Boggle, Balderdash, Wheel of Fortune. Now, if you and I like to play games as adults with our friends and family, why wouldn't kids? And yet, when you look in school, we allow kids to play games, but who are the kids who usually don't get to play the games? It's the kids who struggle.
Yeah.
Because they don't get the work done, and you only get to play the games when the work's done. This is the notion of art coming into it. Let's find something that we do in our real lives and find a way of bringing it into our classrooms for our children. And there's another part of that too. If you play a game regularly, whether it's Scrabble or Boggle, whatever it is, you get better at it over time. Yes. And we have a special name for getting better at something. It's called learning, right? When you get better at it, right? Well,
there are several questions in the chat, in keeping with what you guys are talking about, that are really asking why the term balanced has become so heated when we talk about balanced literacy. Do any of you guys want to speak to that?
Well, I don't know. It's because it's become in the critiques that I've seen in the public press, including those by Emily Hanford in the APR. I can't remember what that stands for, but she specifically critiques balanced literacy as sort of, if you will, a new instantiation of whole language, and sort of equates all that on the way to this elegant research-based argument for making sure that all kids get a chance to crack the code. And by the way, I believe the research on the nature of dyslexia. I know that there's a phonological core deficit. I know that all that is a part of it. I also know that when you do the diagnosis and ask yourself what you're going to do pedagogically, I don't know how different the prescriptions for curriculum and pedagogy would be for kids who've been labeled dyslexic versus those who just struggle and we don't have any category that we can put on them and the like. And so I think that's why I'm so I think insisting on looking closely at the observable symptoms you find of the kids in terms of their word recognition, fluency, and comprehension, strengths and weaknesses and the like. It's kind of like what individualized instruction is supposed to be about. But I'm not going to deny for the moment that there are not a measurable percentage of kids who have reading problems who have neurological correlates that are associated with those. I think the research, to deny that would be to deny the science. So I'm not going there. I'm just saying that pedagogically, we need to look at how we can help kids acquire this full toolkit.
I think the concept with balance is, again, we try new things, something else comes down the pike and it's misinterpreted. It gets overused, but often it's thought of a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it really isn't. It's what each child needs, and that you balance it for each individual child. So it's not 10 minutes with phonics, 10 minutes with comprehension, fluency, and so on. So much is misinterpreted, and that's part of the problem, and not common sense also. Some kids with reading issues, if they get a tutor or individual more help, and they love that person who's helping them, they will get better in reading just because they love that person. So it's just not black and white.
There are one or two questions related to that, Leslie, about if any of you feel there's such a thing as a negative strategy that would cause children to become poor readers or less productive readers.
Now, too much of something, even a good thing, can be bad. I saw one of those things about reading the pictures. If you overdid it, but certainly looking at pictures and graphs help children to get the meaning.
Sure, and Tim gave a great example of where a good tool, Fluency, can run amok when the score on the words per correct per minute test becomes the goal rather than the index. Right. It's like, what if hospitals took as their goal the reduction of temperature? It's a common symptom of many maladies. And if hospitals had a practice of making sure that everyone got enough aspirin or some other, analgesic to reduce temperature, we'd all have lower temperature scores, but would people be any lower? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's comparable. You have to be careful not to confuse indicators with goals. And I think all too often in our accountability craze, we've done that. It's no secret that I'm not a big fan of Dibbles, but Dibbles was conceptualized as a progress monitoring tool. It was never meant to be a diagnostic tool. It was never meant to be a goal. It wasn't meant to be a quick and easy to use index that you could use to monitor kids' progress, because it was too expensive to measure deep comprehension or something else. And they knew that it correlated with that. But then what happened once it was out there and it was so easy to give, people took it as a goal, and then it became an implicit blueprint for a curriculum. I want kids to read faster and I want them to read more fluently, but not because we gave 5 time trials a week. I want them to read faster and more fluently because we did everything so well, including have them use reading as a performative tool, as Tim suggested. So
I often say we want kids to learn to read fast the way all of us learn to read fast, which is we read a lot, right? You develop that automaticity there. I still remember just a couple of years ago, we had children showing up at our reading clinic at Kent State, and 2 second graders. And we did an informal reading inventory with them. And both of these kids looked up at the teacher or the clinician working with them and said something to the effect of, should I read this as fast as I can? Our hearts just broke when you hear that. Kids have that in mind. That's what they want us to do. That is a nice example of what a negative impact of a
Well, the
research
same
based
thing.
practice.
I'll give you another example. You know, the gradual release of responsibility model, which I'm very proud of having, developed the diagram for in 1982 or 3. But it gets rigidified, and people think you have to be in the modeling phase for a certain amount of time before you can go to the participating phase, before you can do to the independent phase. It was meant as a heuristic to help us figure out where we are and how we want to interact with kids. It wasn't meant as a lockstep approach to teaching any skill or practice. Yet, but this is what happens when we subject any useful tool to a strict accountability index. That is, we make a kind of it's, I don't know, like turning it into a demon. It's not meant to be that way, but it's easy to do in an age of accountability, believe me, because once we start counting something, then we pay attention to it.
Well, it turns into a script.
Yeah.
And, how many of us see more and more reading instruction that is scripted? You have to follow, the strict guidance word by word in many cases. And of course, David and Leslie, you guys are talking about choice, how important choice is. And how do teachers have choice when, they're expected to follow a particular, script, if you will?
And kids need choice too.
I think we know a lot, and we spend too much time looking for the next silver bullet instead of refining what we have. And that misinterpretation also, small group instruction can be terrible if it's not good small group instruction. I mean, some people put the kids in small groups and do round robin reading and call it guided reading. Again, the misinterpretation is really difficult. Hi, Mary Rogers, nice to see you. Anyone else have a question or a comment? I want to get back to that playful again. Muriel and I did it on talking about pretty young children, pre-K, K, and play used to happen in first grade and barely happens in kindergarten anymore. And we were talking about dramatic play too. There's playful things at all grade levels, and Tim talked about that. And we like it. And so we need to be more playful, but in a very specific way where the children are going to learn something. Spending their time with Scrabble is a useful kind of play. But fishing for the fish on the magnet, when you spend more time fishing than doing anything about reading, is not useful. But it's playful, but it's not really useful. So we kind of have to analyze what it is that we're doing. Well, did you want to each say a final word, or again,
Sure.
we'll take any other questions or comments?
Well, I wanted to recommend, speaking of science and reading, I spent 2.5 years with a group of people summarizing this big federally funded project called Reading for Understanding. And the federal government spent $125 million funding 6 centers around the country, because one of them dealt with assessment, to try to learn more about what we can do to really get kids off to a great start in reading comprehension, and also to really focus on those kinds of reading comprehension practices in the middle and high school levels. And so these 6 centers did all this work. They published collectively almost 400 articles. My team and I reviewed all those articles, and we looked at the findings and the outcomes and the like. And we came up, it's much more complicated than this, but we didn't discover any new silver bullets. We didn't discover any panaceas. But what we did learn is we learned an awful lot about 3 or 4 things, and I can remember 3 of them right offhand. One of them is language matters. From day 1 of preschool to day, the final day of high school, there's always more language to learn. The kind of language you're learning about changes as you go across the levels, but you can never spend too much time helping kids develop and make their language repertoire more sophisticated. Knowledge matters.
Mhm.
Knowledge matters because we know it fuels comprehension. But knowledge is not only the fuel of comprehension, it's the result of comprehension. Because when you read, you learn more. And when you learn more, you know more. And you know what? When you're on page 5 of a story you're reading, you know more than you did on page 1, right? Because of what? Because you learned something between page 1 and page 5. So knowledge matters at all levels, pre-kindergarten through high school.
Mhm.
The third thing that matters is collaboration, working together. Not only kids in the classroom, but teachers in communities of learners. That's it.
Thank you, Tim. Did you want to say something?
Sure. I'll just end for, I want to say to everybody, thank you for being part of this. You've all had a long day, and now you just spent an hour and a half hearing David and myself yap at you. Hopefully you found some value in that. But thank you for being teachers. As I said earlier, teaching is really hard. You have to be an artist and a scientist to be successful. Since yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, I'd like to share a Irish blessing. Actually, I'm going to send it out as my Fluency Friday activity in a few minutes here once we're offline. But it's my wish for you, and here's how it goes. May love and laughter light your days and warm your heart and home. May good and faithful friends be yours wherever you may roam. May peace and plenty bless your world with joy that long endures. May all life's passing seasons bring the best to you and yours. Thanks to all of you.
I can't say anything that's going to top that. That was just perfect for an ending. Thank you, gentlemen.
I need to work on my prosody though on that one.
That's okay.
Leslie, thanks to you and your crew at your center for inviting us to be a part of this wonderful series you have going. I'm so happy you're doing this in the time of COVID.
Thank you. It's a challenge, David. And I wondered this year when I changed everything a year ago, okay? It's a year ago. Nancy Frey was supposed to be the speaker. And it was right around this time. Can you come? Can you not come? Should you come? Shouldn't you come? And the university closed because there was no way that she could get here from California. She was the speaker. And then similar to all you guys who had to just turn on a dime and change what you do, what do I do? Let it sit there or try and, just make it at least visible? I have found the webinars to be rewarding. The speakers are wonderful. I enjoy seeing you all and watching the numbers. But I hope that we can be in person or at least hybrid starting maybe later in the fall. How many would come in person if you're vaccinated? Nobody? Show me your hand. Anyway, there's something motivating and so socially important and communicating and collaborating when we come together for these kinds of events. So although the webinars, the Zooms have been a lifesaver and will continue, I hope that I can shake your hand in the future. Once again, thank you for coming, and I hope to see you again. We are planning a whole program for next year, and have a good evening. Have a safe evening. I hope you're vaccinated or you're getting it next week or something like that, because you all deserve it and should have been first. Okay, bye. Thank you. Be well.
Bye. Thank you.